Can I see by a show of hands, both here and in online, how many of you believe that the end times are upon us or Yeshua's coming back soon?
What is soon?
Soon. I'll leave soon to you. You can define soon however you like. 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
100%.
What? Okay. I'm seeing a lot of hands. Okay. Now here's my point about that. If you believe that we are rapidly approaching end times, you can't also believe that things are going to get better. Those two things are mutually exclusive. Now, I'm not trying to be a pessimist here. I'm really not. But what I am saying is, if you think that we're approaching the return of Messiah, things are not going to get better for the political system, for the world system. It is not even possible. It can only get worse. And I just want to protect you from placing your hope and your trust in that aspect of it. Should you have a little part of your mind back there that goes, hey, if he's not coming back right away, I'd like it to be a little easier for me while I'm waiting for him. But if you do believe that he's on his way back, then things have to go downhill for this world system. You can't, and that tension of you trying to hold those two things in that'll kill you. Talk about anxiety. Angela?
The will of the people is going to clash with...
Yes, the will of the people, Angela said, is going to clash with the will of Elohim. And that's what democracy is, the will of the people. The will of the people is directly opposed to Elohim. And he's not going to take that kindly. He doesn't like that. So I just wanted to make you aware that I see two great challenges facing the believers in the world right now. One is properly placed trust, and the other is patience and endurance. And this book that these passages that we're going to be talking about this evening are directly related to patience and endurance. Make sense?
Yeah.
Does somebody else online need to say something? I saw a hand up for a second. We're all good to go? Okay. So we'll be facing big challenges. If the master is returning soon, we'll be facing big challenges. It seems like the most of you believe that the Messiah is going to return pretty soon, whatever soon is. We're going to be facing some big challenges. And we have some things to look forward to. We'll have some challenges ahead of us. And I see 3 possible avenues that we can go down. And these are just preliminary remarks to me getting involved in James. But here, let me show you something. Here's scenario number 1. This is from Daniel 11:32, where it says, "And by smooth words he defiles those who act wickedly against the covenant. But the people who know their mighty one, their Elohim, will display strength and take action. And those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many. Yet they will fall by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join them with deceit." Now, a couple of things here that I would bring to your attention. Number 1, we can count on a little help. Right? Do you count on a little help? I think this passage tells you that things are going to get tough, but you can count on a little help. But unfortunately, there's that last little bit of that passage there that says many will join them with deceit, which means there's going to be a bunch of pretenders in the midst of the assembly for whatever reason, whether they're wolves trying to eat the sheep or whether they're seeking some kind of false hope in religion, but they're not. They're religious, but not spiritual, not really connected to Father. They're just looking for some kind of hope and help in religion. But this is one of the things I think we can look forward to, is be granted a little help. But you can tell with falling by sword and by flame, captivity and plunder for many days. Now, it's already been many, many, many days that the people of God have been plundered and captive, and it's been rough for believers in this planet for quite a while. Now, my next idea is, that the return of the Messiah, that is ultimate and immaculate and amazing salvation. So you either get a little help or you get the return of the Messiah at the end of that period of transition, if you want to call it that, the birth pangs or whatever. But there's a third option that is going to become really challenging for a lot of people to face, and that is losing patience, getting fearful, falling away, or joining another rescue plan. There is going to be an alternate rescue plan presented to you very soon. If you believe that Yeshua is going to return, then you know that there is a false rescue plan coming. Something that offers you hope and help and strength and support, all the things that we appeal to our Father for. The actual deliverance through the Messiah Yeshua, somebody's going to come up with an alternate plan pretty soon. And I have a feeling, unfortunately, that we will see a great falling away. That a lot of people who had been placing their hope in God maybe just they lose patience, they lose heart, they lose hope, they get fearful, they fall away, and they go with this other rescue plan, this alternate rescue plan that is probably going to be revealed very soon. So I want to bring your attention to this other passage here, and this is from Exodus 6 and 5. This is the passage that we read every Passover, where the Father says that he hears the groaning and he makes all these promises, but we don't read verse 9. And I'm particularly interested in verse 9 here. Here's what it says. I have heard the groaning of the sons of Israel because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am Yah, and I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their bondage. I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Then I will take you for my people, and I will be your mighty one. And you shall know that I am Yah, your mighty one, who brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians, and I will bring you to the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am Yah. So Moses spoke these great words of encouragement to the sons of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because of their impatient spirit and cruel bondage. Now, I don't know if you've really paid attention to this in the Hebrew, but it says their shortness of spirit, shortness of breath. Impatient spirit, they lost patience. And because they lost patience, they couldn't hear. They lost their ability to listen because of their impatience. This is a warning. I wanted to read you this passage because I see it as a tremendous warning for us as we get into this passage in James about building our patience, holding on to that hope, and enduring to the end. Messiah mentioned on a couple of occasions, the ones who endure to the end will be rescued. I want to be one of those, right? So, we don't want to be short in spirit and unable to hear. So let's now take a look at our little passage from the book of James. This is from James 5 and 7, and here's what it says. Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Master. Behold, the farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it until it gets the early and latter rains. You too be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Master is at hand. Now you can just tell from this little passage, it's only 2 verses, it is packed. It is jam-packed with some eschatological information, with some encouragement, with some knotty little issues that we're going to have to work through to kind of interpret, well, what does he mean exactly by that? So I think that this is going to be really, really critical. And I mentioned to you before that the tone of this whole book, not the whole book, but he had been railing against rich people and, evil, treating others badly. He'd been railing prophetically, I think I interpreted that for you as. But now he's softening his tone quite a bit, and he's trying to be very encouraging to these people. He's switched to those who are persecuted and weak and disadvantaged, and I think he knows that their greatest issue is going to be losing heart and losing patience. And I feel like that is our greatest issue that we are going to face if we are not strengthening our hearts, if we don't know what it means to strengthen our hearts. We could very easily lose patience, lose the ability to hear Elohim, and maybe fall for an alternate means of salvation. That is my greatest desire, is that we steer clear of that. So now, I mentioned to you last time that I had invented my own little definition of patience, and I'll share it with you again. I believe that patience is enduring suffering, abuse, or persecution with courage and with hope, but without complaining or seeking unwise or hasty fixes for the difficulties that we're facing. That, to me, is the best definition of patience that I could come up with. Okay? Now, patience is a virtue, but it's a command. It's not just a virtue. It's not just something that you know, say, oh, that'd be something nice to have, when I grow up. It's not something nice to have when you grow up. It is commanded that you be patient. And it's also one of the fruits of the Spirit, right? Being patient is a fruit of the Spirit. So patience is really about filling your mind with the expectation of deliverance. That's really the answer. And I don't want to go down that road right now, because I'm going to go there in just a moment. We'll dig into that more in just a few minutes. But first, I want to look at the flip side of that coin. What is the opposite of patience? Now, you might say, well, it's impatience. Okay, fine. What does that mean? What does it look like to be impatient? Brett, I know you want to say something, but don't say it without a microphone.
Impulsive, emotional reactions and responses.
That's a beautiful, beautiful definition. I agree with you 100%. It is acting in haste, anxiety, anger. You can think of many examples in the Bible of people who acted impatiently with haste and ended up on the cusp of disaster because they acted with haste and not very much wisdom. Nathan?
We could call it like a disappointment with lack of control.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I thought of, a couple of examples from biblical characters who acted with impatience, and one of the biggest ones was David. He showed great patience in a lot of instances, but with Nabal, he did not. He was ready to jump and destroy that dude. But his wife, Abigail, saved David. She didn't save her husband. He ended up dying. But yeah, he lived for a short time. But David was rescued by her wisdom, saying, man, don't do this. Dude is not worth your effort to go and kill him because he's done you wrong. So he was impetuous, and he was ready to go kill that dude. And he said, I will slaughter all of his who remain standing and have the ability to, literally the text says, piss against the wall, all of his men. Kill them all. That's rash. That was foolish. And Abigail said, whoa, buddy. I understand. My husband is a fool. God will have his way with him. Don't you fall into the trap of acting like an idiot just because you're angry and you feel like you've been wronged. And this becomes important with the next verse that we're going to read in James. Just remember that. Often you feel like you've been wronged, you feel like you've been persecuted or something. You can feel justified in a lot of different actions that you wouldn't take otherwise, right? Another example, Peter jumping up and hacking off the ear of the high priest's servant. That's impetuous. That was unwise, impatient. The Ephraimites, according to legend, deciding we're getting out of here and fleeing Egypt 30 years before Moses arrived, went to the land of the Philistines and got slaughtered because they acted with impetuosity. They acted with haste. They acted without wisdom. So there is great destruction and great difficulty down the trail of impatience. And it is very often that when we are faced with difficulty, frankly, here's the challenge that we all face, and that is that difficulties build patience. We read that at the very beginning of the book of James. We consider it all joy when we encounter various trials because it builds patience and endurance, right? Unfortunately, there really is no growth without suffering. But you have two courses of action. And I don't mean that literally. What I mean is, depending upon the course of action that you take when you face difficulty, you're either going to be redemptive, it's going to grow your faith, it's going to grow your salvation, it's going to encourage people around you, it's going to provide healing and help and strength to you, or it's going to destroy a part of you, destroy other people around you, depending upon how you react. There are only two paths. It's redemptive or destructive. So when you're faced with difficulty, when you're faced with whatever the difficulty is, it could be outside persecution, it could be health issues, it could be relationship issues, it could be anything that you're dealing with that's testing your patience, your ability to be slow, thoughtful, circumspect, not lashing out, waiting patiently for the Father to reveal His will, searching your heart. Am I responsible for this? Did I do something wrong? Am I being punished? Of course, that's always our natural inclination. That is not always the case. But then very carefully thinking about what you're going to do. Sometimes the best answer is to do nothing, to just keep your mouth shut. In fact, I would suggest to you that's probably a lot of the best answers are just to shut up and just take it. But when you take action, that's where the danger lies. You can take righteous action and you can experience salvation through that righteous action, or you can experience destruction. I don't mean death necessarily. I mean the destruction of a certain part of your character, certain part of your soul, certain part of your connection with the Father, certain part of your connection with other people around you. You can do tremendous damage depending upon your reaction to the suffering, the challenge that you're facing. Comments, questions, or concerns? No? Well, you guys are quiet. Am I kicking you too hard? Are my words stinging? I apologize. Now I want to look at what is the Father's example of patience. I think Yeshua, you can also look at Yeshua's example of patience. It says that when He suffered, He uttered no threats. You know what I'm saying? There are so many examples of patience. But looking at the example of the Father and His patience, you notice that James gives us in this passage here, gives us this thing, he mentions it twice, of what we're waiting for. Twice he says, the coming of the Master. The coming of the Master. This is what we are supposed to fix our hope on, and we'll come to that in just a moment. But first, why do you think that he introduces this interesting metaphor of a farmer waiting for precious produce from the soil and talking about early and latter rains? I mean, what's this? Is this just some interesting metaphor to say, hey, be like a farmer. He knows he has to plant the seed and he has to wait for a whole year for the crops to go up. He doesn't just stand out there and stamp his foot in the ground waiting for these crops to grow. He's patient. Is that what we're supposed to take from this? Is that he's just giving us a really interesting metaphor about a farmer?
A lot of things about a farmer that can be...
Well, yeah, there's a lot of interesting metaphors regarding farmers. But believe me, he's not just willy-nilly choosing this interesting metaphor about a farmer. Are you picking up on anything? Anybody picking up on anything here? The farmer and the precious produce and the early and latter rains. Does any of this language seem familiar to you at all? David, hold on just a second.
The feast.
The feast. Yeah. There's definitely some connections with the feast there.
It's about seasons, to know your seasons.
Yes, seasons. Very, very good. David?
Yeah, that's what I was going to tie it to was seasons, but also I tend to think of Israel as two houses divided that will eventually be united. So
Right.
there's like two things happening at once,
Mm-hmm.
which is why you have the early and the latter rains.
Right.
And that's a longer discussion, but yeah, you understand what I'm
I
saying.
do. I do. But it's a good, those are all of them excellent insights. There are lots and lots of prophetic passages that use this same metaphor for, I mean, Yeshua himself, talks about the reapers coming at the end of the age and gathering the produce, and there's grapes and sometimes there's fig trees and, there's lots of metaphors about farmers. And it's real easy to see what James is hinting at here is who is the farmer? In the metaphor of the farmer, who is the farmer in this metaphor? What's he talking about?
I'd say the Father and the seed is the Son.
Yes, he is talking about the Father is the farmer who planted a crop, and he's waiting patiently because he's got a plan. Now, you might even think about some passages, and I'll share a couple of them with you regarding this waiting patiently. The fruits and the harvest are often used for resurrection, and the early rains and the latter rains are also prophetic utterances from both the book of Joel and the book of Hosea. So I don't think he's using willy-nilly metaphors about farmers just being cutesy about how we need to be patient. He's specific, and it's especially a flashing. It wouldn't surprise me at all if there was some kind of one of those paradigms here, one of those Hebrew balance, a chiasm. It wouldn't surprise me if there was a chiasm here, because he says the coming of the master, and then at the bottom the coming of the master. Then we got a farmer, and we got some produce, we got some latter rain and some early rain. It's like, okay, wait a minute, this is entirely prophetic. This whole thing is talking about the return of the Messiah and how this is the substance of everything that we are waiting for. This is what is going to give us strength to get there. And we'll deal with that in a moment. Let me show you a passage here, okay? And I know before I move off of that, yes, ma'am.
You pointed out that it says
Can you grab a microphone, please? Michael, just pass that back if you wouldn't mind. Thank you, sir.
You pointed out that it says coming of the master twice,
Mm-hmm.
and then early and latter rains. So it's like first, second.
There are a
And
lot
in
of...
between, the harvest is growing, getting ready for the ingathering
Right.
at the end of the
Yes,
seasons.
that's a
You don't
great...
know the day of the hour of the season.
Right.
You don't know the day of the hour of the harvest, but you do know the season in which it takes place.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, I don't know whether, the ideas about early and latter rains, those are slightly interesting, and we'll deal with those in a moment. But I want to show you this passage from 1 Corinthians, which is talking about the fruits. So he says, now Messiah has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who were asleep. And for since by a man came death, by a man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Messiah all shall be made alive, but each in his own order. The Messiah the first fruits, and after that those who are Messiahs at his coming. Then comes the end, when he delivers up the kingdom to Elohim and Father, when he has abolished all rule and authority and power. So here we have this idea of Messiah as the first fruits of this harvest that we're waiting patiently for, and then us at the end. So that's just a little lead in. Okay, now this is another example, and I always love this one. This one is basically in Judaism called the 13 attributes, where he puts Moses in the cleft of the rock, and he says, then Yah passed by in front of him and proclaimed, Yah Elohim, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness and truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin, yet he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished, visiting the iniquity of fathers on the children and on the grandchildren to the third and the fourth generations. This is talking very strongly and specifically about the great patience of our Father in heaven. And that really very much leads me to this passage from 1 Peter, where you all know this one. The master is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. And you have to think, okay, this is how many times has Father throughout the ages thought, man, I should just go down there and wipe this place out right now. He could have done that in the Middle Ages. He could have done that just a couple of years after they crucified his son. They could have done that when the Catholics were, murdering thousands and thousands and thousands of people, persecuting during the Inquisitions. I mean, there were lots of things in human history where the Father could have intervened at any time and said, okay, enough. But he didn't. He waited patiently. Even though there was all this suffering, even though there was all this death and destruction and trouble, you know what that resulted in? You sitting here today. You had a chance to live. You had a chance to love, to grow, to experience his salvation. So it is by the great patience of our Father that you even exist. He could have ended this experiment a long time ago, but he didn't. And you know what? I don't know how much longer he'll wait. I know that his patience does reach a terminus point. It definitely does. It's not infinite, but it is tremendously powerful and long. He is long suffering. So these are examples of the Father being patient. Now, I always love to have the example of David being patient, and him dealing with Saul is one of my favorite all-time things when I'm encouraged about patience. When there's this guy who is trying to kill David, and he's like, I ain't touching that dude. Not just, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Saul was Father's anointed. It was clear to me and anyone reading the text, and probably fairly clear to David, that Father had turned away from Saul, but he was still not willing to raise his hand against him. And you know this story. Abishai said to David, today Elohim has delivered your enemy into your hand, talking about Saul. Now therefore please let me strike him with the spear to the ground with one stroke, and I will not strike him the second time. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can reach out his hand against Yah's anointed and be without guilt? David also said, as Yah surely lives, surely Yah will strike him, or his day will come that he dies, or he will go down into battle and perish. Yah forbid that I should stretch out my hand against Yah's anointed. But now please take the spear that is at his head and the jug of water, and let's go. I mean, that is tremendous patience. Somehow, it was probably the adversary who presented David with this wonderful opportunity. And Abishai is saying, look what God has done for you. He's delivered your enemy right into your hand. And David was not falling for it. He said, nope, I'm not taking, well, you've heard the passage, vengeance is mine, saith Yah. Leave room for my vengeance. I will recompense. So that's going to be another challenge for a lot of people who, if unrighteousness is being perpetrated against you, what's your propensity going to be to strike out, to lash back? This, I think, is where it gets challenging, because this is where you get Yeshua talking about turning the other cheek and being willing to suffer for the sake of righteousness, and that's going to be hard for a lot of people. It's going to be hard for a lot of people. So I look at these examples of the patience of our Father, the patience of David. Now, the early and latter rains. The early and latter rains often seem to suggest to me great leaps in the prophetic program of our Father, if you want to look at it that way. Now, just in case you are not aware, I'll read you this little passage from Hosea, which talks about the rains. And this is really talking about the return. It says in Hosea 6:1, come, let us return to Yah, for he has torn us, but he will heal us. He has wounded us, but he will bandage us. He will revive us after 2 days. He will raise us up on the third day, that we may live before him. So let us know, let us press on to know Yah. His going forth is as certain as the dawn. He will come to us like the rain, like the spring rain watering the earth. Somehow it says tyke there. It should say like, like spring rain watering the earth. Now, if you're not aware, the early rains are in the fall and the latter rains are in the spring. That's the general interpretation of this passage, of these early rains and latter rains. And some have suggested that these early rains and latter rains correlate to the giving of the Spirit on Shavuot. That would be like early rains. And then the return of the Messiah as like latter rains. But interestingly, according to the literal interpretation of when these rains occur, that would actually be flipped. You know what I'm saying? So that could be a prophetic rabbit hole that I am not comfortable plumbing. But there's something going on here with latter rains, and there are other passages that you can read about in Joel and other passages in Hosea too. But I think that what you want to consider here primarily is that we are definitely looking at a prophetic shadow picture of the return of the Messiah. And that's what James is really trying to focus our attention on. And why is that so critical? What are we waiting for? Do you know what you're waiting for? Okay, maybe you're waiting for the sky to roll up like a scroll and Yeshua to come floating down on a lightning bolt or something. And that's great. But what is it exactly that we're hoping for? What is it exactly that we're hoping for? What is our hope? Not just that he's going to return, but return and do what? Does anybody know?
Give us his government.
Yes, Brett said, give us his government. Yes, this is precisely what we're waiting for. I'm not just waiting for Yeshua to show up and slaughter everybody. I'm just waiting for him to show up on a cloud with a lightning bolt riding on a white horse and say, all right, I'm putting an end to this. No, I'm waiting for him to establish his kingdom, which is going to be established on righteousness and faithfulness and justice. The Torah will rule the earth. Some willingly will follow, others begrudgingly will follow, but they will all follow. He will rule with a rod of iron, right? You don't need a rod of iron with a bunch of people who are fully on board. So some of you, some of us will be fully on board, and we'll be saying, praise Yah, establish your kingdom. Let your righteousness overflow and rule this earth with your perfect righteousness. Others will be saying, we recognize your right to do it. Go ahead. Mike.
So I guess I'm trying to tie this back to the promises from the Shema, right? So the early rain and later rains are a result of serving him and following his commands. But the heavens are shut up as a result of disobedience. So if we're looking at this early and later rain as ushering in his return, but we're obviously not in a state of full obedience either, how do these ideas fit together?
That's a great question. What are your thoughts on it?
I guess I don't know.
Well, I appreciate you bringing me a thorny issue to deal with, Mike. That's very kind of you.
There's a passage.
But I mean, when you mentioned early and later rains, I didn't think of prophecy right away. I thought of the Shema, right? That's something we pray frequently. It's in the book of Deuteronomy, and that's what popped out to me first.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, why does it make you think of the Shema? We're hearing, hear, O Israel, Yah is our Elohim, Yah is one, blessed be his glorious name, whose kingdom is forever and ever. So what about that is eliciting ideas of early and latter rains?
So the full
the full passage
goes down into Deuteronomy 11.
Okay.
And it shall be that if you earnestly obey my commands, which I command you today, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your hearts and with all your soul, Then I will give you the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the later rain,
Yes.
that you may gather in your grain, new wine, and your oil.
Yes.
And I will send grass in your fields for your livestock, that you may eat and be filled.
Yes,
And then it
absolutely.
says, take heed to yourself, lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship him, lest the Lord's anger be aroused against you, and he shut up the heavens so that there be no rain.
Yes. That's a great commentary. And I think that what the challenge here for me in regards to that passage is, Mike, frankly, that it troubles me. It's difficult to deal with because it almost makes it seem like, and I know that some people do believe this, that we're standing around saying, Messiah, what are you waiting for? Come. And he's like standing around looking at us saying, I'm waiting for you.
Right.
I'm waiting for you to dislodge your head from your butt and get on board with my program. But you see, that troubles me in a sense, because it almost makes it sound like our salvation is dependent upon us, which I know to a degree that's true. But that balance is hard for me as a human with very limited wisdom to kind of figure out. Angela, did you want to say something about that?
The kind of the same theme is going on in Jeremiah chapter 5, where he does talk in verse 24 about the autumn rain and the spring rain, and the one who keeps the appointed weeks of the harvest. But then if you back up to 20 and start reading, it talks about those who have eyes but can't see, and ears but can't hear, and how he's placed the boundary that the seas can't cross over, and that the nations rage, but they can't prevail.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. So, I mean, you
like
and Mike.
reminds me of your message and this week.
I'm sorry, what?
This nation's raging.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The nation's raging. Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a difficult section to consider, frankly. And I don't know exactly what to do with it. I know that our Father is waiting patiently for us to actually get on board and to be obedient and to turn away from sin? Absolutely he is. Absolutely he is. Is his coming somehow dependent upon that? Gosh, I hope not. I certainly hope not, because that's troublesome. That's trouble. That's the part that bothers me, Mike, frankly, is that he would be waiting for us. That's bothersome.
Well, and maybe I'm making a far leap to get you back on track with your analogy, but the other biblical character that exemplifies patience is Joseph. And in Deuteronomy, there is also a connection to this, the blessings of Joseph, right? And when that tribe gets blessed, there's a lot of similar parallels to James 5:7 here about the precious fruits. It says this over and over again.
Yeah.
And at the end of that blessing, it talks about these horns kind of pushing the people back together, right? Ephraim and Manasseh.
Right.
And if we see anything from the end of the Joseph story, there is resolution to this regathering of the house of Israel, but God did force it together, right?
Mm-hmm.
There had to be a great famine for it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great insight. That is a great insight. And I think you're absolutely right that I think we have a lot of responsibility ourselves, but that Father is ultimately responsible for the timing. And I think that each of us can sense that, and I think that this is, I didn't really discover this, but I heard it from somebody a long, long time ago when I was in my early 20s. Somebody was saying that this is just the beautiful demonstration of God's power is that everything works beautifully to further his plan, even though it seems completely outside of his wheelhouse, or, things are going off the rails. The bus is going off the cliff. It's like, no, if the bus is going off of the cliff, it's because he wants it to go off the cliff. Nothing happens by chance. In spite of all of the chaos in the world, it is beautifully and perfectly orchestrated by him. And so, if we're saying, well, are we waiting for him or is he waiting for us? We know what the answer to that question is, right, Angela?
Yes.
Yes. The answer is yes. That's always the answer when you say, is it this or is it that? The answer is yes. So he's waiting for us and we're waiting for him. Now, I think that we saw this, and I've mentioned this 100 times to you before, but I think it bears repeating, that it is this squeezing of Egypt that finally makes the people want to leave. I think that for a long time, they had been doing just fine in Egypt. Do you know how long they were in Egypt? Like the scholarly research, you dig out the numbers and everything. How long were the people in Egypt?
Was it like 270 years?
It was about 210 years. About 210 years. Now you see this quote from when God was interacting with Abraham, he says after 4 generations or something like that. That includes Jacob. Jacob was also in a foreign land being mistreated by somebody else, Uncle Laban. So I think that's part of that prophecy. But from that time, so that prophecy of your children your descendants will be foreigners in a foreign land and mistreated goes immediately to his son. You know what I'm saying? So, or his grandson, excuse me. So the children of Israel were only in Egypt for, estimates range from 210 years to maybe 220, 230 at the most. That's about the length of time that this country has existed. As a republic, I mean. You know what I'm saying? So that's quite a while. They were in Egypt for quite a while. A lot can change in 200 years, 210, 220 years. So the question is, we know for a fact that when Joseph and his brothers were hanging out in the land of Goshen, they had it made. He gave them the best land for raising cattle. They had a special relationship with the viceroy of Egypt. Talk about political capital. They got the best stuff going. They were living high on the hog and doing a great job in Egypt for some time. They would have never left. There's no reason to leave. He had to allow for persecution to arise because he was ready to fulfill the promise that he had made to their ancestors. I'm taking you out of here and I'm giving you a land of your own. But if you're fat and sassy in the land of your captivity, you got no interest in going to get my promises that I gave to your ancestors. The same exact thing is happening to us now. We're saying, we have been saying for some time, and I don't know about you, I'm 51 years old. I remember when I was a teenager thinking, God, I hope that Jesus doesn't return. I've got so much, there was a back of my mind saying, I can't wait for Jesus to return. But you know how it is. I was thinking, I don't want Jesus to return. I got plans. I got to grow up. I got to get married. I got to have kids. I hadn't even had sex yet. I got to party. I got lots of things that I want to do. Jesus can't show up yet. But that was the big warning in all the churches that I grew up in. Jesus is going to show up anytime. It's like, no, don't do it. I wasn't ready. That was the 80s. You remember the 80s, right? That was fantastic. So now we're in the 2020s. And it's not fantastic anymore. And I think maybe we're just old. Yeah, I'm just getting old and complaining, I guess. But seriously, what I'm thinking of is the squeezing of Egypt. That he's saying, hey man, it's getting time to go. And I need you to be uncomfortable or you won't want to leave the birth canal. Right? If there's no contractions, that baby's just going to sit in that womb and die. That's called an ectopic pregnancy. Don't ask me how I know that. No, that's not true?
No.
What is that? There's some word for that. I've forgotten what it was. Stillborn? No, it's just where the baby stays in the mother and doesn't come out. Anyhow, I digress. Nevertheless, we're being squeezed. We need to be squeezed because we're waiting for something. And here's what we're waiting for. Isaiah 2:2. For in the last days the mountain of Yah shall be glorious, and the house of Elohim shall be on the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall come to it, and many nations shall go and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of Yah, and to the house of the Elohim of Jacob, and he will tell us his way, and we will walk in it. For out of Zion shall go forth the Torah, and the word of Yah out of Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into sickles, and the nation shall not take up sword against nation, and neither shall they learn war any more. That sounds fantastic. I'm excited about that. And then Isaiah 51:3. And now I will comfort thee, O Zion, and I have comforted all her desert places, and I will make her desert places like a garden, and her western places as the garden of Yah. They shall find in her gladness and exultation, thanksgiving and the voice of praise. Hear me, my people, and you kings, listen to me. For a Torah shall proceed from me, and my judgment shall be for a light of the nations. My righteousness speedily draws near, and my salvation shall go forth like light. And on my arm shall the Gentiles trust. The isles shall wait for me, and on my arm they shall trust. These are fantastic passages that have to do with trusting in Yah and waiting for him because he's bringing us a righteous, established kingdom where righteousness dwells and rules. This is what we need to fix our hope on. And I'm going to stop there because it's getting time to quit because I was about to launch into the next section. And I'm like, no, I ain't got time to deal with that because it's a little bit bigger. But I want you to know that next time we're going to be dealing with how do I build patience? Are there biblical methods and models that are given to us to help us build strength and patience and peace in the midst of difficulty? Yes, there absolutely are. And you probably already know what they are. Have you noticed over the last 12 years that I'm not really teaching you anything? I'm just telling you things you already know. And that's okay, right? It's fantastic to sometimes we just need to be reminded of these things. So that's where I'm going to leave it right there, is patience, patience, patience. I know that we don't like to learn patience, but we have to. And next time, we will deal with how. How do we grow that patience? And we'll move on from there.